Chapter 60. A little over 3 weeks had gone by since that terrible scene played itself out in the portal room. With the portal being non-operational due to the bullet, which pierced not only Dennis's hand, but also the cryogenics control station, there wasn't anything they could do to revive the Galimarians. For now, they continued sleeping on the ocean floor. Since they weren't in any danger, Jason and Dennis concentrated on taking their time to fix the portal properly. The Coast Guard detail sent to the general area where Admiral Brinstock's body might have floated to the surface searched for at least 4 days. But in the end, there was nothing to find. Once his body had been transported to a spot 1,000 meters below the surface of the ocean and started to rise, it became a welcome source of food for quite a number of marine animals. By the time they were done with the feast, the bones had been picked clean, eventually settling down to the sea floor. Work on the portal didn't actually start right away. If he hadn't requested the time off, Diana probably would have demanded that Jason stay away from the office with Mickey. As it was, he and Mickey, as well as Jace, were acutely ready to spend time getting reconnected with each other. That, coupled with Dennis needing to take some personal time off to tend to his hand, meant things were pretty quiet in the portal room for a while. Jason and Mickey decided to take a trip to the Napa wine country near San Francisco, California, spending a week visiting every single winery, park, and tourist trap they could find. Jace went along on the trip too, and really loved taking a tour through the candy factory along the way. Diana decided she needed to hold down the fort for the time being, making sure nothing and nobody went in or out of the portal room until Jason and Dennis were there. When Karen returned from her honeymoon, she knew nothing about what had happened recently, especially regarding Jason's return. The minute she got home with her new husband, she called Mickey on her cell phone to see how her dear friend was doing. Mickey explained that she wasn't home, but in fact was on a trip to the wine country with her son and a gorgeous guy, promising to tell her more about things when she got back. This completely but pleasantly surprised Karen, and she said so. At the same time, she privately wondered if Mickey was getting into the dating scene a little too soon after losing her husband. After hanging up, Mickey laughed, saying to a grinning Jason that she decided this was news she needed to share with Karen personally, not over the cell phone. She also knew the story to Karen needed to be artfully crafted so as to not reveal national secrets Mickey was now privy to. After getting shot by the Admiral, Dennis was quickly treated for the gunshot wound and released. He had come up with a story about how he was target practicing and the gun went off unintentionally. After laughing at Dennis's good fortune, the doctor said, "If you're going to get shot, the hand is probably the least fatal place," although he was going to be dealing with a lot of soreness for a while. The doctor put his hand in a cast and said it would have to stay that way for at least 4 weeks. Lynn experienced the Florence Nightingale effect, deciding she was going to stay around to take care of Dennis, something he eagerly accepted. Terry decided to stay in town while Jason and Mickey were away. In fact, both she and Lynn stayed at their house during that time. It worked out well for all involved. When Jason and Mickey returned, Dennis was raring to go on fixing the portal, and, for that matter, so was Jason. Since Dennis's hand was still out of commission, that meant more of the portal rebuilding responsibilities would normally have rested on Jason. But by the time Jason returned and got back to work, the acquaintance between Dennis and Lynn had nicely blossomed into a full-fledged romantic interest. So Lynn volunteered to work closely with Dennis and be his hands. It took about 2.5 weeks to order the new parts and get them installed. It normally would have taken longer. However, when the bullet pierced the circuitry of the cryogenics console, A cascade surge traveled through the rest of the facility, wiping out a few other components in the missile defense system. This meant the parts order took on a top priority status, elevating it to the top of any bureaucratic list the government maintained. This time, the consoles and critical equipment in the portal room were changed out, and all critical systems were encased in hardened cabinets. The day finally came when it was time to start powering up the portal systems. It wasn't just a simple flicking of a switch, and suddenly everything was on. First and foremost, the missile defense system had to have priority, so they concentrated on making sure everything there was working perfectly. Once that was accomplished, they began individually powering up the nearly 24 subsystems which comprised the portal technology. Only when each of those systems was independently working was the main control system software fired up, allowing the subsystems to be started in proper sequence. The startup actually went rather well, considering all the changes to the system. Because they had carefully and systematically tested and retested everything along the way, the first full systems test of the portal went off perfectly. They were able to dial up the scene of something they had been tossing back and forth while working that week. After typing in the X, Y, Z, and T parameters, indicating the date and time, they were rewarded with a scene of not only the gleaming white limestone facades of the Great Pyramid of Giza, but also a 9-year-old Tutankhamun being made king of Egypt. They considered dialing the scene forward 10 years to see how he was killed, but they both agreed this was one of those scenes they'd rather not see. Jason and Dennis looked at each other with relief, knowing all traces of the Admiral had now been erased. "Well, paisano," said Dennis, "I guess it's off to Never Never Land to wake up all the sleeping beauties, eh?" "I don't think so," replied Jason. "Why?" asked Dennis with a look of bewilderment. "The first thing we need to do is to get the President up to speed on where we are and what we intend to do. One of the first places Brinstock went wrong was going rogue and making decisions by himself, instead of relying on the elected powers that be." Dennis sat at his station contemplating what Jason had said and realized he was spot on in wanting to get President Michelson involved. He glanced over to the other corner of the room, where Lynn and Jose were just finishing putting away some oscilloscope test leads and high-voltage insulation they had been installing. "As usual, you're right. You still got that email address he gave us?" "Yep, right here." Jason turned to his workstation and brought up the email program he normally used. As he was typing the email, Dennis spoke up and asked, "Hey, wait a minute. Are you sure that email will make it out? He created an intercept for all the email, didn't he?" "Yeah," replied Jason. "But one of the first things I did was remove the intercepts. I wanted to send an email to Mickey while I was here, but I also knew there would come a time when I would want to send this very—" "Good afternoon, gentlemen," interrupted Diana as she entered the portal room. Not only was she entering the room, but also Terry and Mickey, since they arrived at the facility together after spending the morning engaging what they referred to as retail therapy. "Hey!" called out the two men simultaneously. "What do we have on the schedule today? More endless tests?" asked Diana. "Tell me about it," responded Terry. "I mean, I'm all for taking one for the team and being there for your friends, but after the last week of tests, We, interrupted Mickey. "Sorry, girlfriend," acquiesced Terry. "We had to get out of here and blow off some steam." "You'll be happy to hear the tests are complete, and the portal is now operational in all respects," answered Dennis. "Really? So what's first?" asked Diana enthusiastically. Like Dennis, she was really looking forward to making the jump to the underwater habitat where the Galimarians were sleeping. Truth be told, that was also on the minds of Terry and Mickey. Actually, replied Jason, clicking the send button on his screen, I am just now sending an email to the president's personal account, letting him know we need to speak with him regarding the you-know-what, chuckled Jason as he made quotation marks in the air. The president? Asked Mickey. You have the personal email address for President Michelson? Dennis smiled. Your hubby and I are on his short list of favorite people, my dear. When we facilitated that whole hubbub with the Houston bombing terrorists being taken out, he made a point of telling us that any time we needed to talk, just send him an email. With raised eyebrows, Mickey's only response was a muted, wow. Her expression showed she was impressed. Why are you emailing him? Asked Lynn, as she and Jose approached the group. She sat on her oft-used place, Dennis's lap. As I said to Dennis earlier, a big way the late but not-so-great Admiral went wrong was not following protocol in making sure the president knew what was going on. I don't intend on making the same mistake, said Jason. In fact, I have some thoughts I'd like to run past the president on how to keep this portal and the people of this planet safe. Just then, the phone on Jason's console rang. Knowing that anybody who would normally be calling him was already in the room, Jason scrunched his eyebrows together and looked at Dennis, who had the same look on his face. Hello? Those in the room could only hear Jason's side of the conversation. Yes, this is Dr. Jason Marsalis. Okay. He looked over to Dennis and shrugged his shoulders, indicating he still had no idea who was calling. Apparently, he'd been put on hold. Yes, this is Dr. Jason Marsalis. Who is this? Jason cleared his throat. Mr. President. 6 sets of eyeballs in the portal room all collectively went wide in astonishment. Yes, sir. I am alive and well, sir. As I said in my email, that is a long story I very much want to share with you as soon as possible, sir. At that moment, Jason had a thought that caused him to smile. Actually, are you busy right now, sir? Perfect. Yes, sir. No, sir, if you'll give me about 5 minutes, I will be back in contact with you and explain everything. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Goodbye. Jason hung up the phone and smiled at his friend. While the other 4 in the room were completely bewildered at the rather cryptic half of the conversation they had just heard, Dennis was completely on the same wavelength as Jason. Turning to his workstation, Dennis took out his security key, placed it in the console, and fired up the cryogenics systems. Jason took out a similar key and fired up his control station. Parallel T, called Jason as the liquid helium pumps started to come online. Terry leaned over to Diana and asked, Do you have any idea what's going on? She looked back at Terry and just shrugged her shoulders, shaking her head. Min temp, called out Dennis. Firing particle stream, called out Jason. The machinery in the portal room began performing its dance, as the particle stream started to gain acceleration using the immense set of superconducting magnets in the tunnels, guiding it to ever greater speeds. It was always a rush to be at the helm of such a powerful leviathan as it groaned to life. Max V, called out Dennis. Firing, responded Jason. The parameters Jason entered while the particle stream was coming up to speed caused the control surfaces in the portal to shift the course of the particle stream, and the portal field began to form. As soon as the light blue field completely formed, the scene of the Oval Office materialized in the aperture of the portal. It was now evident to all in the room exactly what idea Jason had while talking to the president. Without saying another word, he and Dennis approached the portal and stepped through it. President Michelson was sitting at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. waiting for Jason to call him back, with a faraway look on his face. He, or more specifically his executive secretary, had just received an email on his personal account from Jason. Until that email, he had been under the impression Jason was dead due to an explosion at the Midway Magnetic Facility. According to Kenji, the explosion happened away from the portal, so it remained operational, thankfully. But he was certainly dismayed to hear that such a great American had been killed in the line of duty. He wished he could have publicly honored such a great man, but that wasn't possible due to the secret nature of the Midway installation, not to mention the secrecy surrounding the portal. President Michelson had been staring at the portrait of Abraham Lincoln when, suddenly, what appeared as rays of light started to shine near the fireplace directly across from his desk. Standing up quickly, President Michelson was just about to call for the Secret Service to come running, when suddenly Jason and Dennis appeared in the middle of the light rays. As soon as their bodies completely materialized, which only took about a second, the light rays stopped, and two men with rather large smiles on their faces stood before the president. "What? How?" It was one of those rare times when President Michelson was at a loss for words. "Mr. President, I'm sorry for startling you, but both Dennis and I felt it was important to explain the events of the last few weeks in person," said Jason. "Weren't you just talking to me from your facility in California?" asked the president. "Yes, sir," responded Dennis. The president looked at the two men for a few seconds until he said the first and only word that came to mind. "Astonishing." He breathed deeply, shaking his head from side to side. "Mr. President, may we invite the rest of our team to be here with us?" asked Jason. Sure. You need to use the phone?" asked the president as he began to reach for his phone. "Thank you, sir," said Jason. Then, holding up his open palm to the president, Jason added, "That won't be necessary, sir." Knowing exactly what his friend was thinking, Dennis smiled and turned back to the fireplace. "It's okay, guys. Come on through." For a few seconds, nothing happened, until the same light rays that filled the room a few minutes ago were now doing so again. One by one, new people appeared in the Oval Office. First to come through was Diana. "This is Diana Olaney, administrator of the Midway Magnetic Facility." The president stepped around his desk and approached her. "Ms. Olaney, I am pleased to meet you." He had a look on his face best described as deer in the headlights. "The pleasure is all mine, to be sure, Mr. President. You can call me Diana." Jason spoke again. "This is Dr. Terry Lindstrom. She and her associate—" Lynn now appeared in the Oval Office. "Lynn Marlowe are experts on the alien island of New Galimar." One by one, the president shook the hands of the women. "Mr. President, this is Mr. José Barragón y Cisneros." The president reached out his hand to José, and, after shaking his hand, José bowed in respect. "Mr. President, it is an honor to make your acquaintance," said José with a noticeable Spanish accent. "And finally, Mr. President, this is my wife, Michaela Marsalis." President Michelson stepped over to shake her hand, cupping her hand with both of his. "You can call me Mickey, Mr. President." "Mickey, it is a pleasure to meet you. I am glad to meet the wife of a man who is such a great treasure to this country." "Thank you, Mr. President. He is certainly a treasure to me." "Don't leave Dennis out of that whole national treasure thing," said Jason, smiling at his pal. "Of course not," responded the president. "I don't believe a day goes by without my thinking about the service you both have rendered to this country." "Thank you, sir," responded Dennis. Gesturing to the couches, he said to the assembled group, "Please, be seated." Each took a seat on a couch or chair. While this wasn't the first time Jason or Dennis had been here, it was a new experience for the rest of the group, who were rather starstruck over the experience. President Michelson walked over to his desk and punched a button on his phone.
"Lindsay, would you please bring in some refreshments?"
"Certainly, sir. Would you like your usual?" asked the executive secretary to the president. "Actually, please bring in an assortment of refreshments and snacks for my guests." "Yes, sir. Would you like the Limburger as well?" Jason and Dennis both thought this was an unusual question, but they chalked it up to an odd taste preference on the part of the president. What they couldn't have known was that it was a coded question. Since Lindsay sat immediately outside the president's office, she knew for a fact nobody had passed her desk to enter the Oval Office. The meaning behind the question from the secretary about the Limburger was actually, "Do you need Secret Service to come in with guns blazing?"
"Not this time, but perhaps you can bring the mozzarella."
Mozzarella meant all was green, and there was no need for worry. If the president had ordered some cheddar, though, Jason, Dennis, and the rest of the visiting party would have been dead within the next 10 seconds. "Very good, sir. I'll have that sent in right away." Clicking off the intercom, the president stood in front of his desk and leaned against it.
"I gotta say, gentlemen, I'm still a little in awe over the kind of technology you've created. It's really like a transporter in the movies, isn't it?"
asked President Michelson. "Yes, sir, with the added benefit that we can also move to different points on the clock as well," replied Jason.
"I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. Astonishing,"
responded the president. "Thank you, sir," said Dennis.
"So, to what do I owe the honor of your visit?"
"Before I answer that, Mr. President," said Jason, "I'd like to first point out that each of the individuals in this room was instrumental in keeping the portal safe, and their knowledge of the secrets of the Midway Magnetic Facility was essential. I know you hadn't granted permission to individuals such as Mickey, but their role was, as I said, essential."
"Understood,"
said the president. With that, Jason and Dennis related the entire story of what had happened. Admiral Brinstock had kept the president completely in the dark about a lot of things, especially about how he had marooned Jason in the past, effectively murdering him from the modern-day perspective. At this point, Jason produced the USB flash drive, which had the original recording of when Kenji marooned him. It also had a video Jason recorded when the Admiral tried to kill him. Not one detail was held back from President Michelson. The end of the story culminated with Jason explaining how he wanted to make sure the president was the one in charge.
"I can't believe it,"
said a resigned yet quite angry president.
"I trusted that man with the safety of the nation."
"If it makes any difference, sir, I think he originally had good intentions, but became mentally ill and was getting sicker," responded Jason.
"What makes you say that?"
"Well, sir," replied Dennis, "when he was trying to kill Jason, he apparently was hallucinating. He was looking at Terry, but addressing her as his wife, who had recently died."
"He thought you were Judith?"
asked the president, looking at Terry. "Yes, sir," replied Terry. "He looked squarely at me and talked as if I was his dead wife." The president didn't respond, but once again his head slowly shook from side to side. "But now, sir," said Jason, deciding it was time to turn the conversation onto a more positive path, "we should proceed to awaken our alien benefactors. I spent a month with them while I was in the past, and I really look forward to seeing them again. They are an amazing people, sir. Nodding his head, the president said,
Dr. Marsalis and Dr. Green, you have a go to proceed.
With a smile on his face, he added,
I have an idea. Gentlemen, would you please accompany me to my private office to go over some details?
Certainly, sir. President Michelson, Jason, and Dennis disappeared through a doorway, while the rest of the team stayed in the Oval Office, enjoying the treats Lindsay had brought earlier. Each of them took turns commenting on the surreal nature of having been in California a few minutes ago, but now being in Washington, D.C., talking with the president in the Oval Office. After about 10 minutes, the three men emerged from the president's private office, all smiles.
How are you going to get back home, guys?
Asked President Michelson. All we have to do is step over toward the fireplace, sir. The portal is still active, so it will transport us back to California. The president didn't say anything, but once again just shook his head and chuckled. Taking this as the cue to leave, Diana was the first to step toward the fireplace and, sure enough, she disappeared. One by one, each of the assembled party left the Oval Office until, once again, it was just the president. He tapped a key on his phone and asked Lindsay to have the refreshments taken away. Sir, will your guests be staying for dinner in your residence?
They're gone now, Lindsay.
Knowing she hadn't seen anybody pass by her desk, the president smiled at the undoubtedly quizzical look on his secretary's face. Changing the subject, he said, I need you to bring in today's schedule, please. I'll have to reschedule and free up the rest of my afternoon. Yes, sir. Right away, sir, responded Lindsay. She decided there must be some secret panel to the Oval Office nobody else knew about. It's amazing how many secrets this town has, she thought to herself. Meanwhile, Jason and Dennis got to work right away, not only shutting down the connection to the president's office, but beginning the process of setting the portal's parameters to the habitat on the ocean floor. As was the case when the scuffle with Kenji happened, the first try pointed the portal to a place deep underwater. The location still needed to be refined. While they were refining the portal window position, Lynn came over to stand next to Terry. Are you ready to meet your soulmate, Terry? She asked, smiling. With a start, Terry shot forward in her seat. Oh my God! Exclaimed Terry. With all that's been happening, I forgot he's going to be on the other side of the portal window. The women in the room smiled at Terry, who was now starting to sweat and whose heartbeat had just doubled. What if, said Terry, unable to complete her sentence. She didn't really need to, though. Everybody in the room knew exactly what she was thinking. He's gonna love you, sweetie, soothed Lynn. What's not to love about you? That's easy for you to say. I just wish I knew for sure. He will, responded Jason, keeping his eyes trained on the console. Terry turned her head toward him with a questioning look. What aren't you telling me? A wry smile began to form. Jason looked up and, in a signature move, made like he was zipping a zipper across his lips. Ah! Shouted Terry in exasperation. Diana, Lynn, and the rest all had huge smiles on their faces. As Jason and Dennis continued to work on their consoles, slowly but surely the portal window seemed to get closer and closer to the underwater habitat, until finally its interior showed itself. Wow! Exclaimed Mickey. Not what you expected? Asked Jason. Actually, I'm not sure what I expected, but I didn't expect to see anything like this. The room where the portal was now pointed looked like a reception room or lounge, in the lobby of a posh hotel. There were several conversation pits, not being used at the moment, all designed as depressions in the floor with steps leading down to them. They were differently shaped, but all had what looked like couches lining their inside circumferences. Comfortable pillows were plentiful in each pit, and most had a center fireplace, which would support a display of fire emanating over hundreds of small, shiny glass orbs, or marbles. On the far walls, ocean life swam past the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The windows were roughly 4 meters tall and spanned the entire width of the room. Plants were growing out of pots artfully placed throughout the room, and some caretaker robotics were scurrying from one pot to another, making sure the plants were properly fertilized, watered, and trimmed. Overhead were dozens of circular panels about 4 or 5 meters in diameter. Each was brightly lit and shedding light into the room. It was barely noticeable that the light was slowly cycling between a warm white light to soft colors, which accentuated the comfortable feeling of the room. The floors were both multicolored marble and carpet, artfully crafted into drifting and casually curved designs. "Okay, dude, let's lock it in," said Dennis to Jason. "Yep," responded Jason. He recorded the exact coordinates where the portal was now pointed, but then did something completely unexpected, at least from the perspective of the rest of the party in the portal room. "Commencing shutdown in 3, 2, 1, now," said Jason. The scene in the portal aperture suddenly vanished, and all that could be seen was the metal shielding set up on the other side of the portal window. "Shutdown? What the heck? Are we going to see are we going to wake up the Galimarians?" asked a visibly irritated Terry. "We sure are, but there's one last thing we need to do before going there," said Jason. "Well, that was anticlimactic," muttered Lynn. "Patience, my dear," said Dennis. "We'll go there in a minute." Jason called up the list of saved locations on his workstation and brought up a very important one. "Coordinates locked in. Ready to fire?" asked Jason to Dennis. "Ready." "Very well," responded Jason. "Firing particle stream in 3, 2, 1, now." As was now predictable, a hazy light blue field started to form from the edges of the aperture until it materialized in the middle. When the field had completely formed, the scene was a familiar one to Jason and Dennis. The other inhabitants in the room were in wonder at what they saw. Jason stepped through the portal alone. On the other side of the portal, he talked to the one and only individual there. "Mr. President, we are ready in all respects. Are you ready?" asked Jason.
"Lead the way, Dr. Marsalis,"
responded President Michelson. Jason turned around, stepped back through the portal, and appeared back in the portal room. Everyone could see the president hesitate for a moment before taking a step toward what he couldn't actually see, but knew was there, based on what he just saw happen to Jason. From his perspective, the movement from Washington, D.C. to California happened instantaneously. One moment, he was in the relative silence of the Oval Office at the White House, and then he was suddenly hearing the noise of the machinery supporting the portal window. After taking another step into the portal room, the president realized where he was and turned around to see the Oval Office displayed through the portal. Only one word came to his mind. "Wow!" The others in the portal room were trying to make sense out of what they were witnessing when Jason stepped over to their new visitor and said, "Mr. President, welcome to California, and welcome to Midway Magnetic. If you stand over here for a moment, we will reorient the portal to where we need to go." President Michelson took a step to the side near where Mickey was standing, and he looked a little off his game. He was normally a poised individual while in the public eye, but this was more than the average Joe ever had to deal with. Mickey could see he was still trying to wrap his mind around all that was happening, so she stepped next to him and put her arm through his. "Don't worry, sir. You're in good hands with my husband and Dennis." He looked at her, then over at Jason, who had taken a seat at his control station.
"Oh, I can tell that easily, Mrs. Marsalis. This is just a lot to take in all at once."
"It is, but we gotcha. And don't forget, you can call me Mickey."
"Thank you, Mickey. I tell you what, when we aren't in the public eye, you and your friends can call me Dave. Deal?"
"Deal, Dave," responded Mickey with a laugh in her voice. "Commencing shutdown in 3, 2, 1, now," said Jason. The scene of the Oval Office disappeared, and once again the metal shielding could be seen. "Habitat coordinates locked in. Ready to fire?" asked Jason to Dennis. "Ready, Freddy," replied Dennis with a cheeky grin. "Very well. Firing particle stream in 3, 2, 1, now." The habitat was visible once again through the portal. Once the connection to the Galimarian habitat was stabilized and the safety protocols were cleared, allowing two-way travel, Jason got up from his console and walked to the president. "Mr. President, are you ready to make the first presidential connection with an alien race?" asked Jason.
"As ready as I'll ever be. You know, I have to tell you, I figured being president would afford me the opportunity to do things most others could never do. But this really takes the cake." "This takes the whole bakery, if you ask me," responded Dennis. All in the room laughed at the humor, but now it was time for action. Jason, President Michelson, and Mickey, with her arm still through the president's arm, all stepped through the portal, followed quickly by the others in the room. The first thing to assault the senses was the absence of noise, which had been all around those in the portal room. Next was the aroma of the floral arrangements peppered throughout the room. There weren't any artificial sounds in the underwater lounge. After acclimatizing to the room, there was a calming sound coming from the ocean itself all around. It was a low-frequency sound, occasionally punctuated by the sound of passing animals. Each in the landing party walked around the lounge to get familiarized with the comfortable yet functional room. Jason and Dennis seemed to be all business, though, especially Jason. He positioned himself in front of a control station to access the environmental stasis pod control systems. "How far underwater are we right now?"
asked the president. "According to the portal controls we used to get here, the depth is a little over 1,500 meters below sea level," replied Jason.
1,500 meters below sea level? How did they possibly build this down here?"
asked President Michelson. "When I spent a month with them in the 1400s, they explained to me their builder robot technology. Essentially, they programmed the builder robots to build whatever they needed here, and since they can self-replicate as many times as necessary to get the job done, they were able to build this facility housing about 1.2 million Galimarians in only about 3 weeks. 1.2 million? You didn't tell me there were that many, said a rather surprised Dennis. Well, I have to keep some secrets, responded Jason with a smile. The president stared out the window at the undersea life.
Incredible!
As he was watching, he and all those with him were amazed to see a frilled shark lazily pass by the window. The terminal where Jason sat was similar to the ones he became familiar with on the island of the past. He was able to easily navigate through the screen, and soon was rewarded with confirmation that his commands had been accepted. "Mr. President, if you'll accompany me to this wall here, we are soon going to be presented with—" Interrupting Jason just then, the wall they were standing near opened, and machinery could be heard. As soon as the panels of the wall had completely opened, an oval-shaped capsule, appearing to be made of a white lacquer material, emerged. The pod was about 3 meters long and was reclined back at a 45-degree slant. The front of the pod had a window, but no one could see what was inside. Jason walked over to the pod and pressed a button on a side panel, turning on an interior light. A Galimarian man was sleeping peacefully inside. For everyone in the room, except Jason, this was the first time they had seen a real alien life form. All took a sudden intake of breath at the sight of this seemingly perfect specimen of life. The man was tall and arrayed in what appeared to be an impeccably embroidered ceremonial cloak. The richness of color and stitch was amazing to behold.
"Do you know who this is?"
asked President Michelson. "Yes, sir," replied Jason. "This is the captain of the ship."
"What ship?"
"Well, I guess I didn't explain that part to you, sir. The island of New Galimar is actually an interstellar ship. The part we see above the waterline is quite literally the tip of a very large iceberg, sir. About 98% of the ship is below water. It is a ship designed to fly in space, and it's what their people came here on from their home world over 6,000 years ago." Not just the president, but all in the room were overwhelmed to hear these details, with the exception of Terry. Corlin had shared this information with her long ago. Jason reached over to the control panel on the side of the pod and pressed another button. A mist filled the inside of the pod, temporarily obscuring its inhabitant. As all in the room continued to watch, a series of lights sequentially filled in from the left to the right above the main pod window. Evidently, this was a progress bar, indicating how long they had to wait for the process to complete. Once the lights reached the right side of the pod, the window receded and slipped to the right out of the way. Immediately, the mist which had obscured the Galimarian man from sight now dissipated, revealing him to simply be sleeping. His chest could be seen slowly moving up and down. It only took about another 5 seconds for his eyes to open, revealing completely black irises. Looking from side to side, his eyes settled on Jason, who was now standing in front of them.
"Jason,"
said the Galimarian man, with a tone of what sounded like relief. "Hello, Eobach, my friend," replied Jason with a pleased and gratified smile on his face. Reaching down to steady himself, Eobach stepped out of the pod and stood up for the first time in almost 700 years.
"It is good to see your smiling face again. I trust our plan worked?"
asked Eobach. "Perfectly. Your plan to keep us from contaminating the timeline by making sure the only thing that came forward was the knowledge in my head, then keeping me locked away in a timed pod of my own, was brilliant and worked perfectly."
"That is excellent news."
"Eobach, I'd like to introduce you to someone," said Jason. Gesturing to the man in the suit standing adjacent, he said, "This is someone in our world who holds an office called the Presidency. He is the head of the government where I live, representing a little over 300 million of my fellow humans on the planet. May I introduce you to President Michelson. President Michelson, this is Lord Eobach Aramin. He is the designer of the Erigena, the ship that is also the island of New Galimar, and also its captain. Eobach turned to face President Michelson. Putting his open palms together above his head, he then brought his pressed palms down until they remained over his chest. Eobach closed his eyes and slightly dipped his head.
May you have peace, President Michelson. Welcome to our underwater habitat.
President Michelson, who had always enjoyed a reputation for being a top-notch diplomat, turned his body to Eobach and perfectly matched his gestures.
May you have peace as well. It is an honor to be welcomed into your establishment. The pleasure is mine. Lord Aramin,
replied President Michelson,
I requested to be here personally to thank you and your people for the role you played in helping to save not only your people, but also over 8 billion of my fellow humans. Words cannot express how much we are in your debt. It is my hope we can establish a close working relationship with your people. No, it is we who are in your debt for developing the technology making it possible,
responded Eobach.
Establishment of diplomatic relations with your government is something I cannot personally agree to, since that must come from our ruling body, the Grand Council. However, I will say our people are very fond of Jason for all he did on behalf of our people.
Eobach, interjected Jason, I must mention that it wasn't just me who was responsible. This gentleman is Dennis Green. Without him, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did for your people. Turning to Dennis, Eobach greeted him in the same manner he had the president. Dennis responded in like manner. At this point, Eobach suggested he begin the process of reviving principal members of the Grand Council. One by one, they appeared at the revival station in the lounge. Eobach made sure they were apprised of what had happened while they had been sleeping, as well as the role each of the humans they were now meeting had with the saving of Earth and New Galimar. Each of them greeted the humans with gratitude. As Eobach supervised the selection of the pods to be revived, the next name that came up on the control station screen made him recall a conversation he had with Jason shortly before he went into suspended animation. Selecting this particular pod as the next one to be revived, he called over to Jason and pointed to his screen at the name of the next one to awaken. Jason smiled and looked at Terry, who was on the other side of the room, enjoying a conversation with a woman who was a member of the Grand Council of Galimar. The councilwoman looked to be around 35 years old, but in reality, she was a little over 12,000. As Jason walked up to Terry, she spied him in her peripheral vision and said very excitedly, Jason, you won't believe what Lady Dzanavine just told me. They said they have something called nanite technology, which will make it possible for us to live as long as they do.
Really?
Exclaimed Jason. This was a development he hadn't even considered when he was living with the Galimarian people. This was quite a staggering revelation to him, and certainly merited investigation. But something else was at the top of Jason's mind. Turning to the councilwoman, he said, Lady Dzanavine, may I distract Terry from you for a moment? Certainly, Jason. Turning to Terry, she said, Terry, it was a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure was all mine, Lady Dzanavine, replied Terry. Walking away, Jason said, I need to talk to you over here for a minute. As they were walking, he caught Dennis's eye, giving him a look that said, Get over here. Dennis took the hint and made sure all the rest of the humans understood they needed to come over as well. Assembled behind Terry, she didn't even notice they were near. "What's up?" she asked Jason. Terry didn't register where they were standing at that moment. But when the wall next to them opened up, a new pod came forward and stopped. The window was as opaque as the other ones, but as soon as Jason reached over to control the pad illuminating the inhabitant of the pod, Terry's heart dropped to the level of her shoes. All the color drained from her cheeks, and she seemed to lose control of the muscles in her face, except those causing her eyes to bug out of their sockets. Mickey, Lynn, and Diana all rushed to her side, knowing there was a high likelihood Terry would have a hard time standing. Right there, in front of her, was her beloved Krelon. Not just bones and clothes, as she thought she had seen before, but in the flesh. By this time, Eobach and his wife Ruavu appeared next to Terry. Ruavu spoke up saying, "Terry, you should know that Krelon is very much looking forward to meeting you." Terry looked into Ruavu's dark black eyes and saw the look of a gentle soul, the soul of a sister she never had. "I can't even begin to say how much I have wished for this day to come," said Terry. With that, Eobach walked to the pod and pressed the button to revive his close friend. As with the others, what looked like a mist filled the compartment, and the indicator lights began their progression from the left to right, above the window. Terry looked on, shaking like a leaf, while the women holding onto her stroked her arms soothingly. Even Ruavu reached over and placed her hand on Terry's back between her shoulders. That touch, more than any, seemed to calm Terry the most. The progression of the lights made their way completely to the right, and the window receded, sliding away as it had with all the others. As the mist rolled away from Krelon, several seconds passed, then his eyes opened. Terry took in a sharp intake of breath upon personally seeing Krelon's face for the first time. His eyes first focused on Eobach, who was standing in front of the pod. He reached out to his friend, and Krelon accepted his offering.
"Eobach, is it over?"
Placing his right hand on Krelon's right shoulder, Eobach slowly nodded his head.
"It's over, my friend. Jason was successful in correcting the malfunction in the TSM, and he did it without corrupting the timeline."
A visibly relieved Krelon extended his own hand in the same manner and smiled. He then looked around to all who were gathered there. He spied a grouping of humans looking on, and they all had rather large smiles on their faces. That is, all of them, except one, who at that moment looked like she wasn't breathing, which, in fact, she wasn't. Taking steps toward Terry, he stopped directly in front of her. Putting his open palms together above his head, he then brought his pressed palms down until they remained over his chest. Krelon closed his eyes and slightly dipped his head.
"May you have peace, Terry. I am very pleased to meet you."
"You are? I mean, you are, of course. Not of course, that would be rather I mean, you can be any way you want. I was just..." Terry stopped herself from blathering on and just looked Krelon in the eyes. Those beautiful, deep, dark pools of sight she could almost see her reflection in. Yes, she realized right then, if she were to look deep into the most secret recesses of his soul, she would discover she had lived there all along. Like the words of her letter, there must have been cosmic forces at work. No matter the galaxy, no matter the millennia, no matter the forces against them, Krelon and Terry were one. They always had been. They were one even before Terry had ever been born. They were one even when Krelon lived millions of light years away. Gazing into his eyes at that moment, her heart and his began beating in symphony with each other. They began to beat as one. They were one. Terry reached out for the hand she had seen on the video screen so many times, the same one she had coveted to touch. She took his hand in hers for the first time and caressed it with her quivering lips. Kissing it tenderly, she said, "You have no idea how much I have wanted to meet you."
"Actually, I do,"
said Krelon, with a glassy-eyed smile on his face. What Terry didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, was that Krelon was succumbing to the spectacle of the moment as well. He realized his heart was suddenly no longer his. Rather, there was a new heart beating in his chest, for they had just invisibly exchanged souls. It was the most comfortable, yet the most anxious cocktail of feelings. Standing before him was the one he had been searching for thousands of years. "You do?" asked Terry, wondering what he meant.
"I do,"
responded Krelon. With a look on his face that portrayed happiness he dared not believe would ever happen to him, he reached into his cloak and produced a rolled-up piece of parchment with a red ribbon.
"I know,"
he said with a gentle smile on his face,
"because you told me."
There in Krelon's hand was the very letter she had written to him, seemingly so long ago, the same one she had placed in the compartment above his bed. A very shocked Terry looked at Krelon. "How in the world did you get your hands on that? I put that away in the secret hiding place above your bed. I didn't tell anybody it was there." "I can answer that," said Jason. "I gave it to him." Jason approached the love-struck couple and said, "When we were in your apartment, I secretly retrieved the letter when you were waiting for me on the elevator."
"When Jason came to the island in the past,"
added Krelon,
"he brought this with him. He wanted me to know what would be waiting for me when I was awakened."
"I don't understand," said Terry. "I was the only—" She stopped dead in her tracks. Her face took on a completely different look, one of suddenly solving a mystery. Only two names came to her mind. "Corlin and Lorana." Both smiling, Jason and Krelon nodded their heads.
"Terry, when I read your letter, it felt like you were speaking straight to my heart. Your words soothed me, and at the same time made me more impatient than I had ever been in my life. The month before we all entered suspended animation seemed interminable. As my time for sleep drew closer, I knew, at least from my perspective, I would soon see you. It seems like I closed my eyes to sleep only 5 minutes ago, but even those 5 minutes were far too long to wait. Terry Marie Lindstrom, you are my soulmate. For thousands of years, you were the one I was searching for. All my heart, all my soul, all my love,"
Krelon drew in a breath,
"is yours."
With this declaration of love from Krelon, Terry realized he had fulfilled the most precious yearnings of her heart. She was now his, mind, body, and soul. With those words, Terry shot straight into the arms of her lover. Wrapping her arms around him tightly, Krelon likewise folded his cloak around Terry and kissed the top of her head. With closed eyes, he breathed in the aroma of his one true love. They were one now, regardless of what different races there are in the universe. The scene of love before the eyes of those looking on had never been seen before, and could never be duplicated. Love had never been symbolized more than with the union of these two. It was a triumph, a victory. With eyes closed, Terry and Creelon christened each other with tears of love which had no restraint. As they warmed to the love freely passing back and forth between them, they each felt their breathing, their chests expanding and contracting underneath the grip of their respective arms. Leaning back, but still standing body to body, Creelon looked at Terry through watery eyes, and she did the same. Smiling, Terry whispered, "Ah, there's my blue love." Diana, Lynn, and Mickey held on to each other for support as they shed tears of joy. But it was when Ruavu, who was shedding her own tears, placed her arms around them, that the merging of two worlds became complete. Jason looked around to see if the president was doing all right, and noticed he was off in a corner speaking with a few of the members of the Grand Council. Leaving the scene of love, Jason signaled Dennis with a couple of taps on his arm to follow him. As they approached, President Michelson saw them and smiled.
"Gentlemen," said the president, "I am glad you came over. I've been talking with these esteemed members of the Grand Council about that idea we had discussed in my private office earlier. They agree with you, too, that this technology needs to be in the hands of people who can handle it responsibly. I am happy to tell you they have agreed to discuss your idea of relocating the portal to the island at the next meeting of the Council. I explained that we would release it to them with the provision that not only will they be allowed to use it, but we will be allowed to come to the island and use it as well."
Jason turned to Lord Insolvent and the others. "I am pleased you are open to this proposal, my lords. I know your isolation from the rest of the inhabitants of the planet is important to your people. We will be happy to maintain the secrecy of your society from the prying eyes of others."
"We thank you, Jason Marcellus and Dennis Green, for your consideration," said Lord Insolvent. "My esteemed colleagues and I have been discussing whether our policy of isolationism is something that continues to be applicable in light of recent events. It will still need to be discussed among the full complement of council members, but I can tell you that you and your associates present today are welcome to come to the island at any time."
"Thank you, my lords," said Jason. Dennis added, "We are glad to have been of service."
"Jason and Dennis," added Lord Insolvent, "our people are indebted to you, and we all remain your humble servants. There is something else I have to say, though. Before we entered the suspended animation chambers, the council met and came to a unanimous decision."
Reaching into a pocket in his cloak, he produced 2 amulets.
"These amulets of understanding are a gift to you both, and we wish for you to wear them as a token of our affection and respect. Amulets like these will also be given to your associates here as well, and we wish to confer upon you and your associates the titles of Lord and Lady. From here on out, when you are visiting our island, your names will be Lord Jason Marcellus and Lord Dennis Green. It is one of the highest honors our culture can confer."
Overwhelmed, a speechless Jason and Dennis accepted the tokens of appreciation from Lord Insolvent, and immediately donned their new amulets. Ultimately finding the words, Jason spoke up, saying, "Thank you, my lord. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you." Dennis leaned over to Jason and asked, "Understanding? What does that mean?" "Trust me, buddy," said a grinning Jason, as he placed his hand on Dennis's shoulder. "You're gonna love it." Standing there with his best friend, Jason looked down at the sparkling amulet in his hand, knowing the adventure was a complete and resounding success. Looking over to Mickey, he saw her talking with Ruavu and several others, and it looked like she was really enjoying herself. In fact, they were engaged in what could be characterized as a conversation between old friends, even though they had only known each other for minutes. All in their group were continuously laughing, while alternately resting their hands on each other's shoulders. Adding in the unbelievably melodious music coming from another corner of the room where Diana was being shown a traditional Galimarian dance, the overall feeling was a relaxed, calm happiness, which seemed to be the trademark of this amazing people. Jason felt at home. He felt at peace. Looking back at his life mate, he knew there wasn't anywhere in the universe he'd rather be. Somehow sensing Jason's eyes, Mickey looked over to him and smiled with a wink. Yep, he smiled to himself. Everything is going to be okay.
Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.